Hello, my name is Chris, and I am the moderator for tonight's telephone town hall. This evening, we'll be discussing the facts behind Measure 2, which is on your ballot this November. If you have a question at any time during the event, please press 0 on your phone. We would really love to hear from you tonight. This is an interactive conversation. Again, this is Chris. I'm the moderator tonight for the Measure 92 telephone town hall. We'll be discussing the facts behind Measure 92 with a couple great speakers. The first of which is Miss Dana Bieber. Dana is a expert in this subject, and she's a spokesperson for the No on 92 Coalition. Our second speaker is going to be Ian Tollison. Ian is with the Northwest Food Processors Association and used to be with the Oregon Farm Bureau. So he's an expert in family farming, ranching, and food. Again, for those of you who are just joining us, my name is Chris, and I'm the moderator for tonight's telephone town hall, where we'll be discussing the facts behind Measure 92. We want to hear from you, so if you have a question you'd like to ask tonight, press 0. Again, we want to talk to you, so please press 0 to ask your question. Our first speaker tonight is Dana Bieber. Dana is a spokesperson for the No on 92 Coalition, representing more than 30,000 Oregon farmers, ranchers, businesses, consumers, and taxpayers. Dana has studied the public policy impacts of mandatory single-state labeling proposals, such as Measure 92. Dana, why don't you say hello to everyone?
Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us for a conversation tonight about Measure 92. I just wanted to take a minute or so and just give you an overview on the measure. You know, Measure 92 fails on its fundamental promise of providing information to consumers. And in fact, it's so poorly written that it won't tell consumers whether their foods contain GMO ingredients or not. What it will do, however, is it will increase the cost of food for all Oregon families and increase the cost for taxpayers because this has to be enforced. And, you know, it's important to note it's not only consumers and taxpayers get hurt, it's the Oregon family farmers and food producers, and you'll hear Ian talk a lot about that this evening as well. But one other fatal flaw with Measure 92 is it actually is so poorly written, it conflicts with the 2 federal labeling standards that we currently have, which do tell consumers if there's GMO ingredients in their food. Those consumers can look for the organic or non-GMO label. Both of those are reliable and accurate, unlike Measure 92. So I look forward to talking with you tonight and answering any questions you may have. So thanks again for joining us.
Thanks, Dana. Again, this is Chris. I'm the moderator for tonight's telephone town hall. We're going to be discussing Measure 92. If you have a question at any time, all you have to do is press 0 on your phone to ask that question. Again, this is an interactive event, and we really want to hear from you and take your questions, so please press 0. Our next speaker tonight is Ian Tollison. Ian is with the Northwest Food Processors Association. They represent small and large food processors on issues relating to labeling, regulation, and food costs. Prior to this, he worked for the Oregon Farm Bureau, advocating for family farmers and ranchers in the public and the policy-making arenas. Ian, why don't you go say hello to everyone tonight?
Hello, and thank you, Chris, and thank you for everyone that has joined us. This is an important question going to Oregon voters coming in November, and I can speak from both from the food processing side and from farmers that this is a that will hurt food producers and it will hurt farmers. You know, my main concern in this measure is that food producers really rely on what is on the package and what information we relay to consumers. And that needs to be accurate and reliable information, and that in this measure simply won't do that. The measure would require a sworn statement by people from the farm, from packaging and storage, that would increase the cost of producing food, and unfortunately that cost will be passed on to the consumer. This is bad for farmers because they rely on this technology that they use, and this measure simply will not give any accurate or reliable information that is purported to give to consumers. So with that, thank you.
Thanks so much, Ian. Again, for those of you who are just joining us, my name is Chris, and I'm the moderator for tonight's discussion. We're going to be talking about Measure 92, which is on your November ballot. And we want to hear from you. So if you have a question, press 0 on your phone. We're going to take our first question from Christy in Scappoose in a moment. But before that, I actually want to ask you all a poll question. So using your phone keypad, what I'd like you to do is tell us what concerns you most about Measure 92. Press 1 if you're concerned about increasing grocery costs. Press 2 if you're concerned about misleading labels. Press 3 if you're concerned about the impact on local farmers. Press 4 if you're concerned about this creating a new government bureaucracy that's unique to Oregon. Press 5 if you worry about all of the above. Again, press 1 if you're concerned about increasing grocery costs. 2 if you're concerned about misleading labels. 3 if you're concerned about the impact on local farmers. 4 if you're concerned about creating a new government bureaucracy. Or 5 if all of the above worry you. And our first question tonight comes from Christy in Scappoose. Christy had a question about genetically modified food. Christy, go ahead.
Okay, I just want to know if this is how they modified or genetically changed how the seed is when you plant it. Is that what they're calling modified? It's just how the plant has been, or the seeds that they plant, have they been modified, and is that what they're talking about?
Hey, Christy, this is Dana. I would be happy to answer your question on that. Actually, what GMO foods are, it's really just a very precise way of breeding crops. And actually, farmers have been breeding crops since the dawn of agriculture. This is just much more of a precise way of doing it. And actually, these non-GE crops and GE crops, or GMO crops, you can use either term, they're actually identical to one another. So there aren't any differences, particularly in the finished product of them. So, for example, if you have a sugar beet, and from that will come sugar. Sugar that comes from a GE sugar beet is actually absolutely identical to sugar that comes from a non-GE crop and comes from organic sugar as well. So once they're processed, they're all identical. But yet some crops the crops that come from GE plants would have to be labeled as saying they're GE when in fact they're not. That's where it's misleading to consumers. And Ian, you may have more to mention about this with your farming background.
Yeah, thank you. It's really a good question. And like Dana said, we've been modifying crops for, ever since we first planted maize, which was called maize back then. It's called corn now. And the reason why we have sweet corn is because it has been altered throughout mankind. It's taken a long time for us to get to a point where corn is sweet and it tastes good. All crops have been modified from when they were first found in nature. There is no natural form of corn or sugar beet or papaya or bananas. So that's the first thing to understand. And there's really been a long line of genetic modification that has been used that we all have been eating. And really genetically engineered foods is just the latest example of that. And like Dana said, it is really a more precise way of making a trait from the crop that is beneficial for a variety of purposes. So there's been nothing new in the sense of we're changing crops. Hybrid is another way that you can cross different plants together to get something new. So this is just the latest and greatest. And I would submit to you that genetically engineered crops are the most highly regulated crops out there, while a lot of these older techniques that aren't as well known are not regulated. And so I think that's a very important thing to understand when we're talking about this topic.
Thanks, Ian. Again, for those of you who are just joining us, my name is Chris. I'm the moderator for tonight's Measure 92 Telephone Town Hall. You just heard from Dana Bieber and Ian Tullison, and we're going to take more questions from the audience. If you have a question you'd like to ask anytime, all you have to do is press 0 on your phone. And our next question comes from Bill in Portland. Bill, are you there?
Yes, I am. Yes, I was wondering if the labeling shouldn't be really for the consumer, more so than the producer. And some say modified genetic food is not say that it is. So as a consumer, I'm confused. So I don't know if it is or isn't, but I think it might be.
Hey, Bill, this is Dana. I'd be happy to address the issues that you raised. I think you were talking about, does this provide consumers the information that some consumers may want? And that's actually where Measure 92 fails on its fundamental promise of providing accurate and reliable information. It's so poorly written that, in fact, 2/3 of the food and beverage that's sold in the state actually gets a special exemption and wouldn't be labeled. And then other foods that actually contain or are made with GMO ingredients, things like meat and dairy products, they get a special exemption, and they're not labeled. So Measure 92 doesn't, in fact, provide consumers reliable information. But we do have other ways of finding out whether foods are contain GMO ingredients. Consumers looking for foods that are GMO-free can look for not one but two different labels. They can look for either the organic or non-GMO label. Both of those are reliable and accurate, and they don't have all these exemptions and misleading information that Measure 92 contains.
Thanks, Dana. Again, if you're just joining us, all you have to do is press 0 on your phone to ask a question. We are having a live interactive discussion about Measure 92. For more information about Measure 92, you can go to factsabout92.com. Again, that's factsabout92.com. And if you have a question, all you have to do is press 0. Our next question comes from Mary in Portland. Mary had a question, kind of think about the cost. Mary, are you there?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am.
Go ahead, ask your question, Mary.
For one thing, I have a few things I need to say. I was told by a doctor if I don't know what an ingredient listed is, or if I can't pronounce that ingredient, he said not to eat it. And that's, to me, most everything. And the other thing is how will this measure help me? I don't understand most labeling as it's written now, or if it's true what they're listing. And food already is way too expensive.
Yeah, Mary, thank you. I can take that. If I'm not a doctor. I don't want to second guess a doctor's opinion. But I do know a little bit about terminology, working in the legislature and working in farming, and there's a lot of complicated terminology that actually is a simple concept. So just be able to say that just because you cannot pronounce it, it means that it's not safe to eat. I just don't think that really passes the eyeball test for me. These things, it depends on your level of understanding of how well you can read these ingredients. Secondly, the labels that Dana has referenced, the GMO free and USDA organic, provides the information that people are looking for that's reliable. But I want to talk to you about what you left off about prices. This is a serious concern that everyone should be aware of. You may go to a grocery store and you may look at a gallon of milk, and then next to it, it's a gallon of organic milk. In my store that I go to, it's about double in price for the organic, and there's a reason for that. There's a strict process. There's a standard that organic producers have to adhere to, and that puts more of a cost on that final product. What this measure is essentially doing is forcing everyone to buy those products in this standard. For me, sometimes I have the money to do that, and other times, I don't. And people should be able to choose that. And the marketplace, I think, is really doing a good job of leading people to those products. And this measure would force a lot of these foods right now that, like the non-organic milk, that are going to have to go through those same sort of standards. So again, this will be an added cost that unfortunately be passed on to the consumer.
Thanks, Ian. Again, for those of you who are just joining us, all you have to do is press 0 to ask your question. Our next question is going to come from Paula in Salem. Paula had a question about labeling and what's on the label and the accuracy of the information. Are you there, Paula?
Yes, I am. I keep hearing the argument that the labeling based on Measure 92, the labeling is will give us non-accurate and misleading information, but I'm not hearing what that actually means. How is telling us whether something is GMO or not GMO going to be misleading or inaccurate?
Hi, Paula. It's Dana. I'd be happy to answer that question for you. Yeah, Measure 92, it does. It provides inaccurate and misleading information, and let me explain what I mean by that. The way the Measure 92 is written, it doesn't tell consumers if GMOs are in their food or not. It doesn't tell you which ingredients are GMOs or which percentage of them are. And like I said a little bit earlier, 2/3 of the food and beverage that's sold in the state gets a special exemption, and so it wouldn't be labeled. Well, that's entirely misleading to consumers. An example of that, like I said, would be all the meat and dairy products. Even though they come from animals that were fed genetically engineered grains and injected with genetically engineered medications, they wouldn't have to be labeled because they get a special exemption under Measure 92. That is misleading to consumers. At the same time, there's thousands of food products. Any product, for example, that contains sugar or cornstarch or soybean oil or products such as that, any of those products would have to be labeled that they contain GMO ingredients in them, even though they don't, because the sugar or the cornstarch or the soybean oil, once it's been processed, it contains no GMO ingredient in it. Yet it would have to have a label on it. That is completely inaccurate information. But one thing I should point out, though, I recognize that there are consumers who prefer foods without GMO ingredients in them for whatever reason. And for them, there's two labels. They can look for the organic and the non-GMO label. But Measure 92 conflicts with that, and it provides misleading and inaccurate information, and it's one of the many reasons we believe it deserves a no vote.
Thanks, Dana. Again, if you have a question you'd like to ask us, all you have to do is press 0 on your phone. Our next question is going to come from Steve. Steve had a question about this initiative and kind of some of the costs. Oh, I'm sorry. Our next question is going to come from Salvatore. Salvatore had a question about who's supporting Yes on 92. Are you there, Salvatore?
Yes, I am. And my question was, who's the big money behind the no vote, and who's the big money behind the yes vote? My concern has always been there's these special interest groups that have an agenda that shut down industries with no facts. So I would just like to know who the dollars are behind the yes vote.
Salvatore, I'll take that question. This is Dana. This is a recycled initiative that we've seen in Oregon. Oregon voters rejected it, and then the supporters of it took it to California a couple of years ago, and then to Washington, and all those voters rejected it. It's the same funders of the Yes campaign are these big companies. They're like Dr. Bronner's Magic Soaps, for example, is a company that's very supportive of this as well. And it's the same funders who really have just been trying to pass this initiative in various states with absolutely no success, because the measure fails continually from the fundamental flaws of it, that it's so poorly written and it provides inaccurate information, and it certainly increases the cost of food for all Oregon families, and that's why we believe it deserves a no vote. Now, you also asked about our side. Who's funding the no side? The no side is funded by companies that are supporting their customers in the state of Oregon, and those customers are farmers. Oregon farmers are wholeheartedly, every major agricultural organization is urging a no vote. And the funders of our campaign are those who are supporting their customers, the farmers.
Thanks, Dana. Our next question now comes from Steve. Steve had a question about the price that this would have. Steve, are you there?
Yes. I don't know why in the advertising for a yes vote, they don't just go after the whole United States instead of Oregon. And the fact that we have been genetically modifying all kinds of food and animals since the beginning of time, I haven't seen that in any of the advertising either. And the cost for Oregon buyers or just the normal grocery store purchaser is going to be outlandish, because all these canning outfits or packaging outfits are going to have to push everything off into one corner for Oregon only, and it's going to cost at least 10 to 20% more for every item that has to be put up with this GMO labeling.
That's a great.
You're absolutely correct, Steve. This is Ian. You know, I work for Northwest Food Processors. We have food processors that cross state lines. They ship things down to different states. You know, we don't live in just within our borders. Oregon is less than 1% of our food population, and trying to have an Oregon-only way to deal with that will really hurt consumers unfairly. I think that it will limit choice and increase price. And there is, you know, my organization supports a bill in Congress that looks at the entire U.S. to deal with this issue. And that's really where we need to be going. But you are absolutely correct, Steve. Great point.
Thanks so much, Steve. Again, if you have a question, all you have to do is press 0 on your phone. Our next question comes from Ms. Johnson. She had a question just kind of about genetically modified foods. Are you there, ma'am?
Hello?
Hi. Go ahead and ask your question, ma'am.
Yes, I was calling because I heard that the genetically altered food is not good for us. So if it's not good for us, why would I want to buy that product?
Hi, Ms. Jones-Sick. This is Dana. I'd be happy to answer that question for you. In fact, GMO foods, not only are they entirely safe, they are actually identical to non-GMO foods. There's nothing different about them. And in fact, these are the foods that we've been serving to our families and on our family dinner tables for the past 20 years. I mean, literally, there have been billions of people who have eaten trillions of meals with GMO ingredients in them. And over all those meals and all these years, there has never been not even one documented health consequence because of that. And this has been extensively studied, as Ian talked about earlier. I mean, prestigious organizations such as the American Medical Association and the World Health Organization and the National Academy of Sciences, and the list goes on, they have all deemed that not only are the foods safe, but they are identical to non-GMO foods.
Thanks, Dana. You know, we're actually going to take a second here and ask you our second poll question, and that is, what actions are you willing to take to protect Oregon consumers from this costly measure? So push 1 on your phone if you're willing to encourage your friends and family to vote no on Measure 92. Push 2 if you'll write a letter to the editor about voting no on Measure 92. Push 3 if you'll share on Facebook or Twitter about voting no. Push 4 if you'll do all of the above. Again, 1, to encourage your friends and family to vote no on Measure 92. 2, to write a letter to the editor about voting no on Measure 92. 3, to share on Facebook or Twitter. Or 4, to do all the above. And, you know, Dana, I'm going to just jump in here as a moderator, and I have a question for you about this, because I'm still trying to wrap my head around everything here, but is every food going to be labeled? Are some foods going to be labeled, others not labeled? How does that work?
Well, actually, the vast majority of food that's sold in the state gets an exemption and won't be labeled. In fact, about 66% of the food won't be labeled under Measure 92, which I find that to be an alarming exemption for people who are really looking for reliable information. I mean, we talked a little bit about all the meat and dairy products, and even though they come from animals that were fed GE grains, they get a special exemption. I mean, the exemptions, they simply make no sense. For example, if you go to buy a can of pop at a deli, that doesn't have to have a label on it. If you get the identical can of pop at a grocery store, that does have to have a label on it. And then, again, back to those thousands and thousands of food products, anything, again, with sugar or corn oil or soybean oil, none of those products actually have GMOs in them, in those food ingredients, yet they have to be labeled as such. It's completely misleading and inaccurate. It doesn't tell consumers what foods are the GMO ingredients and what percentage of it, and it just fails consumers looking for accurate information, and it's why it deserves a no vote.
Thanks, Dana. Next up, we're going to go to Will from Yamhill, and he wants to know about how you'll be able to tell the difference between a GMO and a non-GMO food. It's Claudette. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm listening.
All right, go ahead and ask your question, Claudette.
I'm wondering why they're so concerned about the GMOs and they're not talking about the other chemical food additives that are going into all of our food products. I don't care about it genetically. Corn, if it tastes better and it's good, love corn. Why are we just focusing on that? Why aren't we going into the chemicals that they're adding into our food products?
Hi, Claudette. This is Ian. I can take that. I'm not exactly sure what you're talking about as chemicals. As a member of a company that has people that package and help produce our food, food safety is the number one issue for all of our members, and they take this very seriously. One recall in peanut butter, for instance, could really hurt the entire market. We care very deeply about the safety of our food, and in fact, we produce the world's safest, most abundant food supply in the entire world. And so there is no, I'm not sure what chemicals you're talking about, and of course, Ballot Measure 92 doesn't talk about this. Ballot Measure 92, frankly, is a poorly written measure that doesn't tell consumers anything more of what's in their food and will increase the price of the food for the consumer.
Great. Next up, we're going to take a question from Will in Yamhill. Will had a question that he wanted to ask about GMO versus non-GMO labeling. Are you there, Will?
Yes, I am. It was more versus the non-GMO and the exempt foods, because they're so worried about eating genetically modified foods, but there's going to be so many that are exempt from that. How are they going to know the difference between foods that are not labeled, or that are exempt, and the ones that are non-GMO?
Yeah, well, that's a really good question because, for the consumer walking around the grocery store, they're not going to have that information available to them because, remember, Measure 92, the way it's written, the absence of a label would signify that there's no GMO in it. But, in fact, that's not true because the absence of a label could just mean, is it because there's no GMO in it or it wasn't made with GMO, or is it because it got a special exemption? So you can see how it completely misleads consumers who are looking for information about these foods. Instead, what those consumers can do, and where they won't be misled and they won't get inaccurate information, is they can look for one of two labeling standards. And these are nationwide labeling standards, organic and non-GMO. Both of those labels indicate that there is no GMO ingredient in the food, and consumers can accurately and reliably count on those labels. It's another reason why Measure 92 is unnecessary and it deserves a no vote.
Thanks, Dana. Again, if you have a question, all you have to do is press 0 on your phone. You can also learn more at factsabout92.com. Our next question comes from Sabrina in Milwaukee. Sabrina, go ahead.
Hello?
Hi. Go ahead and ask your question, Sabrina.
All right. I know that there was mention that mankind has been doing the genetic modified of like wheat and so on and so forth for over 10,000 years. But I want to know if everything's been genetically modified, our meats, our produce, everything, then why would there have to be labeling? What's the difference between GMO man-made and GMO, say, genetically modified with things to make it more resistant to disease, or injecting into the DNA, other things to make it grow better or taste better? What's the difference between how people did it in the past, did it today, and then would everything have to be labeled GMO?
Yes, thank you, Sabrina. You're right. There really is no difference from what's been done in the past. Everything has been modified. This is a little bit more of a precise process, much more scientific. So there is no difference. I think the main difference that this measure does is it really doesn't tell the consumers what's in their foods. It doesn't give the percentage of what is in the product. It exempts 2/3 of the food we eat. Many foods would be labeled even if there's no GE ingredients in it, while many others are exempt. So it really falls short of the promise that the proponents are trying to do, and that's why we urge a no vote.
Next up, we have Richard in Portland, who had a question about other countries having labeling. Richard, are you there?
Yes, I am. My question was basically a lot of the other countries have their labeling on all of their products. Now, what is the difference between this labeling that they're trying to do here in Oregon as compared to what they're labeling in Europe, for example?
Hi, Richard. This is Dana. I'd be happy to answer that question. Actually, Measure 92 is very different than the labeling laws you'll see in, for example, in Europe. What you see in Measure 92 exists in no other country in the entire world because it's different than this one. But one other thing I'll point out, you're talking about countries there. Well, Oregon is just 1/50th of a country, and that's where we get into the real problem, and that's what really drives up the cost of food. Remember, food would have to be segregated everywhere from the farm to the food producer to the distribution center for Oregon only. Or likewise, food producers would have to remake their food with higher-priced non-GMO ingredients in order to avoid putting on an inaccurate and misleading label. Well, those costs are also pushed down to consumers because it's an Oregon-only labeling requirement, and that's where the costs really increase for consumers.
Our next question comes from John in Ashland. John, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. First point I want to make is I agree that the measure is unnecessary because of the possibility of labeling things non-GMO or organic, and I think that the state ought to encourage that and support it in whatever standard setting that it can do. However, I'd make another point, and that is that one of the arguments against 92 is kind of disingenuous because, in fact, when you genetically engineer a plant, it's possible to put in non-plant genes, which you can't do by traditional hybridizing. That is, you can put in stuff from fish or bacteria or whatever, to make it resistant to disease. So I think that's kind of weakens the argument, and if I was you, I wouldn't try to make that argument.
John, I have to say that that's not quite accurate. That's not true what you said, because what genetic modification of crops does is it's just simply a more precise way to get a seed the way that farmers want to use it. And when you talk to farmers about this, they'll tell you that they like using GMO crops for a number of different reasons. Number one, that they get higher yields with less inputs. And what I mean by that is they use less water, which of course is critical, particularly in certain parts of Oregon. They use less herbicides. And because they get the greater yields and the smaller acreage, they're running their farm equipment and their tractor equipment far, far less. So it's just an option that some farmers want to use this GMO technology for their crops, and Measure 92 just puts an enormous burden on Oregon family farmers, and that's why these groups have come together to urge a no vote.
Thanks, Dana. That actually brings up something I wanted to know, which is you keep talking about this burden, and maybe, Ian, could you address a little that this financial burden is going to place on the people who produce these products? How would this measure harm them? Could you address that a little bit?
I most certainly can, Chris. The burden that would be on really the entire food supply chain is really what it comes down to is a sworn statement that they would have that this was handled differently from storage, transportation. I mean, it even comes down to you can't use the same shovel from one field to the next. Anytime there is more regulation or more hoops a farmer or a food producer has to go through, it's just going to cost more money. And, we've all learned this in Economics 101 that that price, that increase of cost is just going to be passed down to the consumer. And that's why this measure is so bad.
Thanks so much. Again, I want to hear from all of you folks on the phone. What action are you willing to take to protect Oregon consumers from this costly measure? Push 1 on your phone again if you're willing to encourage your friends and family to vote no on Measure 92. Push 2 if you'll write a letter to the editor about voting no. Push 3 if you'll share information on Facebook or Twitter. Push 4 if you'll do all of the above. Next up, we're going to take a question from Kevin in Hood River. He wanted to know a little about if we could give an example or two of GMO products. Are you there, Kevin?
Yeah, that's what I was looking for, a couple of specifics as far as a GMO product and what it is, because it's still a bit of a mystery to me. It's because organic, I just look at it as being and not using chemicals and all, but what is a GMO product? A couple examples specifically.
Yeah, I can take that. And actually, organic doesn't mean they don't use chemicals. There is a allowable list of synthetic chemicals allowed in organic farming. Organic is really just a process of how that's made, but chemicals aren't allowed in organic farming. Secondly, there are, there's about eight crops that are genetically engineered: canola, cotton, corn, sugar beet, squash, papaya. Let's see. I know I'm missing a few others. Let me just alfalfa and soybean. Those crops are genetically engineered in the U.S.
Thanks, everybody, for joining us tonight. I realize we're kind of getting to the end of our telephone town hall, and I just wanted to take a moment and say thank you. Thank you so much for spending, nearly 40 minutes with us to discuss this really poorly written Measure 92 that's going to be before voters here in the next coming weeks. And as we discussed tonight, Measure 92, it really fails on its fundamental promise to provide consumers any information that is accurate and reliable about whether their food contains GMO ingredients or not. Now, that's unlike the two current labeling standards that we have, organic and non-GMO. Those give consumers accurate and reliable information. And instead, with Measure 92, what consumers end up getting is higher costs at the grocery store and higher costs on tax day because the state government is going to have to regulate this. And those who also really get hurt are Oregon family farmers. That's why our coalition has come together and is urging a no vote.
And Dana, I would just like to echo those thoughts. Thank you for everyone. At the end, this measure really does hurt family farmers. It hurts Oregon small businesses, and it hurts the consumers. These crops, these foods are no different than any other food out there that we eat. They've been unfairly targeted, and this gives farmers the tools they need to help feed a growing population. And that's what we need to support. We need to support farming. We need to support food. The U.S. and Oregon in particular grows some of the most healthy, abundant food that we can offer to the rest of the world. And that's why we urge you a no vote. It will severely cripple our ability to remain competitive.
And to learn more about Measure 92, you can go to factsabout92.com. To join our coalition, you can go to votenoon92.com. Thanks for joining us tonight. We're going to end the event right now, but we're going to put you into a voicemail. So if you have a question that didn't get answered or you have a comment you want to leave, you should put that there. Thanks so much for your time this evening and have a great night.